I want to start from the beginning and talk about JUMP, the Justice and Upward Mobility Project, which you are the managing director of, and you're working directly with Larry Miller, the chairman of the Jordan Brand Advisory Board and former president of the Portland Trailblazers, to build. Tell everybody here all about, you can tell I'm excited here. Tell everybody here what JUMP is, what you're trying to do, and how you're moving into the future.
Sure. So I think before I talk about the programmatic elements and kind of our philosophy, vision, and mission around the Justice Upward Mobility Project, it's important to go back in time just a little bit and share a little bit about my own story and how I met Larry. For those of you who don't know, justice impacted myself. I served 24 years in prison, almost 10 years of that in solitary confinement, and with the help of Stanford University and Mayor Brown, a big corporate law firm, I was able to successfully navigate my release through a civil rights action. And when I came out into society after spending that much time in prison, I saw a reentry system that was very unsupportive and mirrored the prison system. And so it immediately struck me that for people who were exiting the system were actually entering another system in reentry that wasn't compatible with workforce development, educational opportunities, housing, all of the different things you need to be successful through reintegration. And so I really started to think about workforce because I was extremely ambitious myself and wanted to hit the ground running. And after a short stint as a policy director, I designed a program of what I thought the ultimate reentry system would look like. And with the help of the state of California in 2021, shortly after I was released, they awarded me $30 million in my organization to build out the first ever tech and workforce development training program in the country that's residentially based with full wraparound services. And then from that, I was offered a position at a tech company in San Francisco to build out corporate social responsibility and a foundation around this idea of how do we create second chances in the tech sector and in the broader economy for people who are exiting the system. And to the organization's credit, they wanted somebody that was proximate to the issues to be able to lead the work, which when you think about voices and the stories that we tell, oftentimes those stories are extractive in nature, but not very empowering when it comes to actually leading the work and designing the work. And so I have to give full credit to this organization, Checker, for those of you who don't know. People thought I was crazy for joining a background check company, but to their credit, 5 or 6% of their workforce was justice impacted people, formerly incarcerated people that had served life in prison, that did everything from engineering to policy work to working in marketing, all up and down the career ladder. They did not discriminate and really built this idea into the company culture that most employees got really, really behind about how do we support justice impacted people into livable wage employment. It was there that I met Larry Miller. And I remember one day I got a Slack from the EA of the CEO and said, "Have you ever heard of Larry?" And I said no, and she sent me an article in Sports Illustrated about his story and said, "If you'd like to meet him, fly up here to Portland and we'll spend the day with him." And so the next week, 5 days later, I was on a plane to Portland. And what I found was probably one of the most humble and just amazing leaders that I've ever met. I saw a peer. I saw someone who had lived a very similar life to me in his youth and had achieved things that I aspired to achieve. And we just naturally hit it off immediately. I think he saw in me a younger version of himself and somebody who had had similar experiences to him. And we started talking about how we could leverage our respective experiences. And it was actually at Horizons, just a couple months after meeting Larry, that we kind of came out together and told each other's story a little bit and decided that we wanted to do this work together. And we met because Larry published a book. For those of you who don't know, JUMP, My Secret Journey from the Streets to the Boardroom. It kind of chronicles his story from growing up in West Philadelphia and doing 10 years in prison, starting at the age of 16 for a homicide, and then getting his college degree in prison in accounting at Temple University. And when he got out, he went through a recruiting process with one of the biggest accounting firms in the country, and was denied employment based on him revealing himself voluntarily that he had a background. And he decided at that point that he would not share that voluntarily anymore, and this was pre-background check and Google, and just went on to have an amazing career. He took himself through business school and got an MBA while he was at Campbell Soup, and went on to Kraft, and found himself the president of a company called VF Corporation, where he negotiated a deal with Nike to buy swimwear of all things, speaking of summer. And from that, he joined Nike and became the first black vice president at Nike. And then when Michael Jordan retired for the last time, Phil Knight, one of the most iconic leaders in the world, came to him and said, we're thinking about taking the Jordan brand to Foot Locker and licensing it. And Larry understood something that no one at Nike understood, is what Michael Jordan and his greatness meant to the culture and to the people. And he talked Phil into giving him 1 year to take that logo that we're all familiar with. Anybody who's ever wore a pair of Jordans, we got to owe that to Larry. And he said, I can build a brand off of this and bring out the Michael Jordan in everybody. And a year later, he built a campaign around Stevie Wonder's song. For those of you who may remember, I'm dating myself, where he took some of the most iconic athletes in all the different sports and built a brand around it. And it turned into a multi-billion-dollar brand. And he was so successful that he got a call from Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft, who owned the Seattle Seahawks and the Portland Trail Blazers at the time, and was asked to become the president of the Portland Trail Blazers. In short, he had just had this amazing career. And Larry and I started talking about the power and influence of sports, which we really appreciate. I appreciate that last conversation because it was a great segue into this one, with athletes and brands and entertainers and the entertainment sector, and how the role of those entities shape the social fabric of America specifically. America is a very unique country in that a lot of what influences what we do or say and what influences consumer behavior is tied to sports and entertainment. And obviously consumers drive brands and businesses. So we started talking about how we could leverage his experience at the Jordan brand and some of the things that he's done to really navigate change in social justice, for second chances for people who've touched the justice system, and have blockers, especially around employment and education, something that we think poverty drives a lot of this stuff, and if we can give people access to the middle class economy, that we can ameliorate a lot of the conditions and circumstances that surround the justice system. So we created a project called the Justice and Upward Mobility Project, named after his book. And it focuses on 4 primary pillars, and I'll try to be short because I want to make sure we talk about James and the amazing work that they're doing and the work that JFF is doing here. We really want to focus on creating gold standard apprenticeship programs and pre-apprenticeship programs for justice impacted people. We understand there's a skills gap, and we want to create opportunities to not only learn, but also earn livable wage at the same time, so that way people have pathways where they're supported into livable wage jobs and careers. We also understand that media and narrative drive a lot of these conversations. And if you think about just the last 6 months, how much media and narrative have played in shaping how people are thinking today, we think that by leveraging some of the voices in sports and entertainment, that we can actually change the bottom of the bell curve in the way people think about the 80 million people in America that have touched the justice system and have some form of a record. And we think that we can do that through a couple different levers. One is building localized coalitions across the country. And so we plan to build at least 10 cities in the next 5 years, where we really engage all of the stakeholders in a particular geo where unemployment and recidivism is a problem, and really empower the local communities to build support systems to support not only people before they go into the prison, youth, but also people after they exit the system, and make sure that they're supported and have pathways for those that want them to livable wage careers in their life. And then the last piece that we're really serious about and we love, and what brings us to James and the wonderful work that they're doing, is policy and advocacy. We understand also that sports and entertainment and those levers in the social fabric drive policy change. And how can we use those levers to actually create more opportunities in education and workforce development for underserved communities, specifically the communities of people who've been touched by the justice system. So, Larry couldn't be here today, and so I wish that he could, but his story, and he's really an inspiration to everybody in the country, and that's led us to be able to work a little bit with James and talk about some of the things that the NBA Social Justice Coalition is doing, which he'll talk a little bit about, and then we could talk a little bit about how we can possibly do some of this stuff together. James.
I love it. The story that Ken tells is so important because I would say it's Larry was trying to create more Michael Jordans, but in the world of social justice and social impact, we need to create more Larry Millers and Ken Olivers. And the reality of that work is that it takes people across sectors to come together to create those pathways. And the National Basketball Social Justice Coalition was designed with exactly that in mind. We are a 501c4 joint venture of the NBA League Office, the Players Association, and the Coaches Association. And we were founded in 2020 with the explicit goal of bringing disparate parties in the MBA community together to say, what can we do to deepen our engagement on social justice? And not just social justice as a concept, but the long-term policy work that we know is necessary to create better conditions, better lives, and better impact for all of our communities. And so I report to a board that is 5 active MBA players, 5 team governors who own the majority stakes in the franchises, 2 head coaches, the commissioner, deputy commissioner, and executive director of the Players Union. That is a lot of different voices. That is a lot of different perspectives. And so for our board meetings and for the work that we do, the goal is to say, well, from each of your different seats, from the relative positional power that you have internally, externally, the platforms that you bring, what is it that we can do as a group? And how do we fairly represent MBA community values on the social justice issues that impact our work, our world? And so we initially came in with 3 issue areas: criminal justice reform, policing reform, and voting rights. Over the course of another year of work, we realized that we needed to break community safety into its own track of work, because violence prevention, violence intervention was just so important. And as we think about how we have operated, and we have now been in operation for 5 seasons, and looking back at the work as it has developed, as it has evolved, being able to see the expungement summits that we have been able to host, including one here last week at Smoothie King Center with the Pelicans in 4 different markets that allow people to come in and start clearing their records. That's a value add. Being able to use the MBA platform to talk about the importance of voting rights and access and open up arenas so that people could register or cast a ballot in different markets. That's an investment in democracy. Being able to think about the bills that we have come out and supported, whether it's in the criminal justice space, in the policing space, that at a state and local level, we know there's very little traction at the federal level on so many of the issues that we all work on. But at a state and local level, like, these issues are live, they are real, and participation matters. And that participation is not just from everybody who has the right to vote. It's also about the institutions in our communities and how and where they show up. And being clear that we as an MBA community care about how we show up, state by state, with team engagement, team investment. That really matters. And the connectivity to the workforce development that JUMP is focused on, thinking about second chances, the fact that the MBA community, we're a set of businesses, 30 distinct businesses in 28 major media markets with quite literally billions of eyeballs on the work on the court every year. But those same eyeballs are also trained on what we do in community. And for anybody who lives here or elsewhere that has an MBA franchise, you recognize and understand how close and deep the relationship is between the fan base, the community, and the team. The team is not just about basketball or the sport. It's about the people. It's about the culture. It's about that local space. And that's where we get our cultural capital. That's where we get the influence that we have. And it's something that we try to keep at the center of all the work that we do in positioning ourselves on social justice issues. I want to flip it back to you, Ken, for a second, because the work that we're doing dovetails so well, obviously, with the work that you're building at JUMP. But the theme of this conference is bravery. And when I look at your career, I look at the time you spent inside, and then building your work and your success professionally in the policy space, in the tech space, now in the nonprofit and impact space, going into sports and entertainment, like, what has bravery looked like for you as you've made that transition, and how have you been able to navigate all of those different moves in your professional life?
Sure. So I think when I initially came home, I probably felt like every other justice impacted person, that I wanted to kind of like put that in the rear view and not have to talk about it and go out there and find the best job that I could possibly find and upskill if I could. But I was privileged to be able to be released into an ecosystem that actually embraced my story in the Bay Area in California. And I was really astonished and like taken aback by how many organizations and how many people really rallied around my experience and other people's experience like that. And so for me, I was taught very early on, like literally within the first few weeks, to be extremely unapologetic and authentic about where I'd been, where I came from, and the time I spent. And that was contrary to what we all felt like when we were in prison. I mean, most of us come out to the community and like it's a shame, it's a scarlet letter kind of that you wear of something that you did 20 years ago in many cases. And so it was liberating, right? And so it really empowered me to not only find my voice, but also to think about ideas and creativity and innovation about the way that I could actually pour into others, the way that others poured into me. And I just want to double click on that, because I think what's empowered me and made me as brave is that others saw more in me than I even saw in myself. And so it's important to me to be able to give that to others and rally up as many people as possible to pour into other folks and change the narrative, not just in society, but change the narrative about the stories we've told ourselves, about lowered expectations, about what we couldn't do. Many of those stories were told to us before we ever entered the prison system, whether that was in elementary school, whether that was a family member, whether that was something in the community that happened to us. And most of us thought that our destiny reached a certain place. For people who look like me in my community, many of us didn't think we were going to live past 21. Most of us lived a nihilist type of life because we were told that this other sandbox of Americanism didn't exist really for us, and where we existed was in Watts and Compton and East Oakland and the Fifth Ward and those types of places. And so for me, I think working with people like you, working with people like Lucretia and JFF and other just amazing organizations across the country, I think bravery is with them. And bravery has allowed me to really make this work really about others and freeing other people. So for me, it's a privilege and an honor. It's like I couldn't sleep at night if I didn't do this work, because I feel like giving back and making space for others who aren't as privileged and blessed in this particular moment is a charge. It's a responsibility.
And I am sure we could keep this going for a lot longer, and we're getting to time. So I wanted to just see if there are any questions out there for Ken and James. And we do.
Ken and James, thank you so much. Ken, good to see you again, former colleagues at Checker. With Free World, nonprofit that helps folks who were incarcerated get their CDL and kind of, yep. Shout out to Jay Wang. One of the things that I face, and I'm on the employee partnership team, is we get a lot of agreement, but not enough alignment. What are some of the things that you do in your organizations to change that agreement to actually being like, yeah, we got you, to like, we're meeting Monday and Friday we have a plan?
Yeah. I think that's interesting, and I'm gonna give a short answer, but then I want James to be, because he faces similar things about trying to convince organizations to get involved. I think for me, it's about constantly telling stories weaved in with data. Like I worked with a lot of Checker companies, and a lot of people like hear a story and they love it, and they're like, oh, Ken or Larry or whoever, right? And we're down with it. But then it's a more difficult conversation to talk about implementation. And so I think, like anything else, it's relational. So continuing to build the relationship, continuing to have the conversations, continuing to educate, continuing to spend time. And what I find myself asking folks and discussing with folks is I'm not asking them to change their entire organization with change management. I'm asking them to hire one person. And I know for a fact through experience that when a company hires one person and they hire the right person, that their entire company culture is going to change, that they're going to change their policies, that they're going to love this work, and that they're going to open up inclusive hiring practices, not only for just justice impacted people, but for a wide variety of people that they hadn't thought about before, and think about that in different ways. So I won't say it's a sprint. It's not a 50-yard dash. It's a marathon. And if we go into that understanding the trajectory of struggle for different groups of people, like for me, it's not a blocker for me, because I understand it may take 2 years to convince somebody. It may take 5 years, it may take 10 years. But that's the beauty of the work, is that when you finally do get somebody to do things one time, you change lives on both sides of the equation, and that's what's meaningful to me. But I'd like for James to give his opinion, because he works with organizations as well in some of the work that he does.
Yeah, I think it's such a great question. Part of what I think is most important is not expecting a dolphin to be a lizard. Like, so if you are working in a corporate space, no matter what it is, and I work in a corporate space in sports, we're a multi-billion-dollar global multinational, right? The thinking that story will be enough to get you the alignment you're looking for, it just won't work, because you have entrenched interests that are doing the thing that they are designed and supposed to do, which is create value of a certain sort in a certain sector. you have to understand that and know that when you're coming in, if you're trying to shift that, you have to both understand what it is and to a degree be very much invested in that organization's success and show how the value propositions are aligned. And that I think can sometimes sit in what feels like a tension with what you're trying to accomplish on the impact side. Because they are in tension at the beginning, because the company's not doing the thing that you think it should be doing or that it seems deadly obvious. At the same time, once the work is done, and that can be, to Ken's point, over the course of 2, 3, sometimes 5 years, you are building something into a big entity. And it should be the goal, in my view, and I've seen this in my current role and in others, that you are trying to turn a cruise liner and slowly head it in the right direction. And unfortunately, the time horizon for change, we all want it immediately because the need is so great. But the reason big institutions are big is because they are necessarily slow, they last. And so when you build within it, then the change that you're building and inculcating into that culture, into that company, into those practices, then hopefully that will last too. So a lot of it is about being able to hold in your head and your hands the seeming disconnect between what is an immediate and urgent need to make change and the slow-moving pace and culture of a corporation. But that's part of the job when you're in this work, is holding those two things and making them work.